Two, one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm one of your hosts, but tonight we have a very cool extravaganza that we're going to be discussing tonight. We're starting our superhero month, where we're going to be discussing anything dealing with the hero generation. So, the first film that we are going into is from 2018, and I thought, who suggested this movie?
I think I pitched this one.
Dustin, yeah.
Dustin, did you want to tell us the lowdown of what this film is all about?
Well, it's a difficult movie to summarize and really do it justice. So tonight's movie is Into the Spider-Verse, which is a really trippily animated Spider-Man story that introduces us to Miles Morales Spider-Man, as well as the concept of, well, other ways of telling Spider-Man stories.
Right.
So we're introduced to... I'm trying to figure out exactly how to put it. So the plot of the movie focuses around an attempt to pull beings from other dimensions into the main dimension, and
into that dimension that's in the
yeah. And they just so happen to pull in a bunch of spider people from well. They get a pretty wild variety in there.
Right.
That they do. Well, they got Miles Morales Spider-Man, who's in just important distinctions. So anybody that's familiar with the Marvel universe, they know that Marvel has numerous universes. Earth 616 is the official one.
Right.
And I don't know what the official designation is for any of the universes that they pull from. Not that it really matters, because the point is that we're following Miles Morales in his universe, which, if I'm not mistaken, he originated in the Ultimate universe,
Right.
and then got integrated into mainstream 616 Marvel continuity. But you got Miles Morales Spider-Man, you've got a couple different versions of Peter Parker. Like, you've got the one that is in Miles Morales' universe who has blonde hair, and then you've got the one that primarily follows him through his journey, who's kind of an older, more
he's 10 years older, and he's gone through had a harder life.
Kind of like a midlife crisis.
And he goes by Peter B. Parker. Yeah.
Well, and we got Spider-Ham, we got Spider-Man Noir, we got Spider-Gwen, aka Spider-Woman.
Technically, Peter Parker, Spider-Man Noir is also Peter Parker, if I'm not mistaken, but it's like a reality that's basically set in the 30s, and and then Spider-Ham, Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Gwen Stacy technically goes by Spider-Woman, but
people call her Spider-Gwen, which is Spider-Woman's correct.
Great
but,
comics.
And I cannot remember the Japanese one, but
Penny
that
Parker.
one, and that was interesting. Like, I would argue I'm probably the biggest Spider-Man fan here. That was one that I hadn't heard of or read about. But the other ones I had in some form or fashion. And, well, not to get too far afield, but I think out of all of them, the one that I think surprisingly translated really well, and perhaps because it was animation, was actually Spider-Ham. He translated very well, because like he was such a one-off joke character. It really was not something that ever should have had the kind of legs that it had, but the fact of the matter is that because it was animation, he translated so well into the film world, and largely because they could draw from like Porky Pig and old Warner Brothers cartoons, because that's really where he comes from.
He reminded me of like Porky Pig and what is that? Scrappy Doo.
Yeah, something like that.
I like how they actually had him be a
spider bitten by a radioactive pig.
Yes. Well, it gets more involved than that. The pig in question was May Porker, who was deluded by the radiation into believing that he was her nephew.
Yeah, it's so great.
I had no idea what the story behind Spider-Ham was, and this is
Oh yeah.
oh my.
He really
It was a
just
nice
meant,
short too.
he was just
It
meant to
had.
be a joke character, and it really just took on a life of its own.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that, well, it's a funny name, but also because he was kind of cute in his design.
And we'll probably talk about some of this as we go, but they do talk about in the commentary how the character really took a life of his own when they toned down the joke nature of the character and made he actually gets a couple poignant scenes,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the best comedy I think tends to come from well, like whenever I'm watching a comedy, I always try to assess what the dramatic elements are in the story, because those have to undergird the comedy. Otherwise, it doesn't really have a lot of meaning, unless it's like Airplane and it's all about the gags. But well, just to get back to the story, I think I can summarize a little quicker. So the larger framework of everything is that, and spoilers everywhere. The larger framework of the thing is that the Kingpin, aka Wilson Fisk, in Miles Morales' universe, he is trying to get his wife and son back who died. And so by trying to punch holes into different dimensions, he's trying to find them and bring them back. But in so doing, threatens the stability of all realities. It's kind of a classic multiple universe coming together kind of story, which actually Spider-Man the animated series did that before the comic Spider-Verse story happened, quite a few decades before, and then before the movie. But again, that idea is nothing new. It's just that's the reason behind everything. But yeah, different spider people from different universes all coalesce because the lines between them are getting blurred. And it's all about Miles Morales, who in a parallel origin story to Peter Parker, but different circumstances. It's his uncle who is a criminal, and because he is closer to him than he is to his parents, he enters the circumstances by which he gets bitten by a similarly genetically engineered spider as the Ultimate Spider-Man. That's how it happened in Ultimate Spider-Man. But it's another Oscorp spider. And so, he undergoes similar physical changes to Peter, but different circumstances, because it's more about, I don't want to become like my uncle. Instead of Peter's he wasn't enough like his uncle. But there, it's about responsibility in a different way. And also it's him being bombarded by all these other more experienced spider people that he has to eventually realize that he has to be the Spider-Man of his reality, and it's his quest to become the Spider-Man of his reality when he doesn't believe that he can. And so it's another kind of believe in yourself kind of story, but that is very much part of the Spider-Man lore, no matter which Spider-Man you're talking about.
Now, I know that my first time and experience with this, since we need to, I guess, go into that, is I had seen it in theaters, and I so wanted to see this in theaters. And I could not catch this in theaters because I couldn't get the right people together to go and see it, or the time to see it on my own. But I then decided to dedicate myself to getting it on Steelbook at Best Buy when it came out. So I reserved the thing. I knew I was going to get it. And on the day I got that thing on Steelbook, I watched it, and I was just blown away by it.
Wait, there actually was a Steelbook?
Yeah, there was.
Oh yeah, there's a limited Best Buy Steelbook.
It's sold out right. I couldn't get
I have it. I have the Steelbook, and well, I got lucky because on eBay, well, I had bought it on 4K, but without the slipcover, which sucked. But on eBay, I found just the Steelbook without any discs in it, and so I put the 4K and the Blu-ray disc in the Steelbook, and I was like, okay, I'm good now. But yeah, it's a beautiful Steelbook, and definitely worth it if you can also get the 4K. Sorry, I got the
Well,
hiccups. If you can get
I
the
thought,
4K
yeah.
disc.
I bought it on 4K the day it came out, and I never saw the Steelbook available anywhere. Like, I was at Best Buy when they put them on the shelf, and
Yeah,
we never got the
I
Steelbook.
think they were sold
know,
out from
there a couple of
pre-orders. I'm
times
pretty
with you.
sure of it.
Yeah, you really had to pre-order that one. I was surprised that it was that limited because to me, I thought to myself, this is going to be one of those movies that is a what do they call it? Just the one that they would mass produce, you know?
Oh
Well,
yeah, well, but you never can tell with that stuff because, like, the Joker Steelbook that Best Buy did, that thing sold out so fast, and
Oh yeah,
you know,
Yeah.
I got
you
lucky on
can't.
that one too.
well,
Well,
you
Now I'm
also have
kicking
to,
myself
I
about
wasn't.
Knives Out.
you also
I
have to
wasn't
keep
even
in
all
mind.
that blown away. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say you also have to keep in mind that Sony produced so many units of the Sam Raimi Spider-Mans and the
Oh,
Amazing
no.
Spider-Man. They probably were afraid of overproducing this one. They
It's
were-
possible, or they wanted to do like what they've done with those releases also, which is that they have different editions that get brought out incrementally, or like the ones that they've done from Homecoming onward, including Into the Spider-Verse and including Venom, they put into that Best Buy exclusive Steelbook where it's basically everything from Homecoming onward all in one
Right.
package, which is a neat idea, even though you're mixing the MCU ones in with
Yeah.
the non-MCU ones, but still it
It's
is
fun.
such that you got to be careful with how those things, like when they get released or what their availability is or whatever, which now here's some interesting little background as we're talking about story and everything. Some interesting background with the character. I should make clear the character of Miles Morales. So
Well, maybe
he,
before we get into that,
Yeah.
let's let everyone
Yeah.
finish their
I
first
think everybody
impression.
should get to their first
Yeah.
impressions.
Did you
definitely.
finish that, Brandon? Or
Yeah, I wanted to just say, I was blown away by the animation style, and to me, I felt like it really did things that, because I had seen The Incredibles 2 also
Yeah.
not that long prior to it,
Mhm.
and to me, I was disappointed. I liked it, but I was disappointed because it was just rehashing something that was done over and over again, and it was rehashing it in an entertaining way, but it was still a rehash. Whereas I felt this one went a lot of new places in a lot of new ways. Like I say, I was just really happy about it, and I was overjoyed for the fact that it did win the Oscar.
me too.
KJ, let's hear your first impressions.
First impression was wow. I think that was the first word that kind of came to my mind. As soon as I saw it like open up, I was like, wow, like the animation. Like I don't really watch a lot of animated movies, so for me, it was like, this is how animated movies look in 2019 or 20 or whenever it came out. And I was like, that's nice. That's really then when I got into the actual story, I was blown away because the one thing I'm going to say is, I was a kid in the early thousands, so the Tobey Maguire is a special one in my heart, that trilogy. So I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to really like this, but let's give it a shot. But I'd say I really thoroughly, as African American, enjoyed it because it was something different. It was something fresh. And I felt like the story of Miles, in terms of them showing him as a teenager going through this transition, I think somewhat it's actually better than Peter Parker's transition, because I don't think, personally speaking, at least from what we've seen in film, I don't really think that we've seen his transition as a teenager in the Spider-Man. It's not as interesting as, to me, Miles.
Right.
Miles has so many different factors going on in his life. And I know we're
He,
going to touch
he
on.
does, and also people can relate to having a relative that maybe isn't viewed upon as favorably by the rest of the family as other people, in comparison to not everybody has had their uncle gunned down by someone that they could have stopped,
Exactly. And and then also think about, at least especially in 2020, like now presently. With his father being a cop, an African American who's a cop, and we see the different scenarios that are going on in the news with cops and how they're viewed by the media. Like, that was something that I really liked and I enjoyed because he's in a situation that isn't typical, but I think everybody can relate to him in some way, form, or fashion because some of us have those family members who do things that many people might not view greatly, but we still love and we still care about them. But I really enjoyed it, man. I really, really enjoyed it, and I can't wait until we talk a little bit deeper about that story. But 10 out of 10 for me.
Well, just very quickly, the interesting thing that you mentioned was when you were speaking as an African American. I know someone because yes, that Miles Morales is that. He also has some Latin American in
Puerto
him,
Rican,
and Puerto Rican. And I know a Puerto Rican woman, a very, very good friend of mine, who she didn't know anything about Miles Morales, and she was really amazed at that. Seeing that on the screen in such a big fashion. So like that's part of why representation is important, but also like you said, that fact that his Miles Morales' father is a cop. Well, the fact that he has a father there in the house, that we don't have another kind of single parent situation. Well, in media, especially in a movie geared at children and everything. So he has his father there, plus his father is on the side of law enforcement, which also sufficiently counterbalances his uncle, who is not. So you've got inner conflict going on there. It's just got a lot of good elements.
And can I say one other thing? The one thing I want to say that I was really impressed about was nothing about Miles was stereotypical. And I think that's the one thing that, for me as African American, I relate to the most. Because when they did the new Spider-Man Homecoming with and they made the Mary Jane character African American with Zendaya playing it. I love Zendaya, I like what she did. But me personally, I didn't like that because, like, look, they wrote it for a Caucasian person. Let a Caucasian person play it. If you're gonna give me that kind of a new character or a new person playing that, make the character different if you're going to insert them into that sort of a role. And that's what I really love about Miles is he's different. And
well, I mean, technically it's not Mary Jane Watson, it's Michelle Jones. So I mean, that is a new character. We've never had it was more of an homage to the classic idea of Mary Jane, but it wasn't that same character.
Exactly.
Right.
But
go ahead. No, go ahead. Finish.
No, well, I was gonna finish this just by saying the last thing that I really liked about Miles was that I think, especially being African American, he could have been, how do I say this, like he could have been so much different of a character. And I'm just kind of shocked because the role was not the character was not written by someone who's African American, and I actually was surprised that they really were able to get that, like,
keep him grounded.
Yeah. I believe he was created by Brian Michael Bendis.
Yeah, he's Jewish, and it was the writing was like when I heard Miles talking, like, I know that guy. Like, I know that guy. I remember. Like, I know that guy.
Brian Michael Bendis. I've met Brian Michael Bendis in. I've met him in person at a convention. I actually ran into him literally, where he actually bumped into me as he was getting into his booth, and he signed my copy of the first collection of Ultimate Spider-Man. But he gets all the credit in the world, not only for helping to create Miles Morales, but he also just reinvented Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe in general. He gave his very clear voice, very dialogue heavy, very savvy voice to that world, such that then once because Miles Morales as a character was inspired very heavily by Obama, but also Donald Glover, and so the combination of those two and the world that he'd already established, that helped to create someone who felt very real and relevant, but also could fit inside of that world that he already created, that felt like it had reinvented Spider-Man.
And they actually made a couple of nods to Glover. There's a community scene shown in the film, briefly. Yeah. And there's, so that was a nice little nod there to that origin. But,
I always thought Miles was definitively an American character. a character that really represents what I think of as most America today, even if it's a part that many parts of society wish to deny. I mean, shoot, we have a large part of society that wants to say that Puerto Ricans aren't U.S. citizens. And this is which they're not very intelligent people who think that necessarily, but it still is great to see this as just as a person, because this is America.
And it's also nice that even though Miles has some issues with his parents, he does have a complete family technically, and they are very loving parents. They just work really, really hard, and there's a whole backstory that's barely touched on in the film, that Jefferson is an ex-agent for S.H.I.E.L.D., and that's a big part of why he's a little standoffish at times. But yeah, there's a whole bunch there. But I guess I'll go ahead and throw in my 2 cents, since I keep trying to. I saw the movie in theaters and absolutely loved it. I was blown away by it. I didn't know what to expect going in, and I came out going, "Holy crap, that was awesome!" And I agree that The Incredibles 2 was not the most original film of the year.
I don't even remember what happened in Incredibles 2.
You stack it up against this one and Makia and Mirai, and all three of them went places that animation just doesn't go typically. And it was a great film, but it wasn't on the same level as the others in some ways. But I've seen this one at least twice since then. I've had it for a minute now, and I watched it twice for this, once the regular and once with the commentary. And the commentary track is quite instructive. What's up?
Have you watched that alternative version that they?
No, I haven't. What's different about that?
Actually, it's amazing what they do, because they really do. It feels like an alternate universe, because there's a lot of story development that they do differently. They develop the friendship between him and his best friend at the school, which they skip pretty much entirely.
So it's like an alternate cut, basically.
Yeah.
I need to look at that. I hadn't realized what that was. I watched most of the other. There's a lot of featurettes on some of them are really good. I like the voice actor one because it's fun with these films seeing the people that are behind the voices, and they really did. One of the cool things about this one, I think, is both in front of and behind the characters. The diversity that you get, because when you get the spider people, you've got 2 of them are girls, 1 of them is African American and Puerto Rican. You've got the people playing them. The 2 girls are both of Asian heritage. You've got the Shamik Moore, of course, is that's one of the fun things. Apparently, he wrote in his journal before he ever got the role that he was Miles Morales, and he got the role, and it was like making things happen in your own life sort of story. It's a good success story there.
And then you got a Nicolas Cage there, and when you got a Nicolas
Cage, because
when you got a Nicolas Cage, then you've got the diversity quotient covered off on a whole bunch of levels, all in one person. And by the way, he did make for a very good Spider-Man noir, because he was able to replicate that old-timey way of speaking, because mentally he comes from that older cinema world, which I can very much respect, because I come from the silent films and 30s, 40s. I love that stuff.
And that was one thing where I don't even know if they were necessarily going for this. They probably were, but I don't know if they were. All too often you see roles that could add diversity, and they just give it to a well-known white person, whatever. But in this one, they went the opposite route. Gwen Stacy is played by Hailey Steinfeld, who's half Filipino, and Mary Jane's played by Zoe Kravitz. So it's like they almost went, the opposite route, which I thought was kind of fun with the casting. Plus, I just love Hailey Steinfeld on every level. She is incredible. And Gwen Stacy as Spider-Woman is probably my favorite Spider person. She is phenomenal. I love those comics. But I've also read a lot of the Miles Morales ones. Particularly, he is good buds with one of my favorite. Talking about diversity in comics, Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, is one of my favorites, and I'm waiting for her to get a movie. And
yeah, she probably will eventually.
Yeah, so I want to see them do a movie together. I want to see that. It would be awesome.
Well,
They also need to put in Silk. Isn't I think she's Japanese or whatever, but they need to put her in there in the next one. Which I mean, it's an interesting thing when you talk about diversity with.
They know that Toby Spider-Man will be in the next one.
Oh, I cannot wait for that. I fucking love Toei Spider-Man. Something that's interesting with diversity when it comes to voice acting is that it's always a good goal to have, just like diversity in any field of acting. It's a slightly different beast just because with children characters, most of the time those are voiced by adults who are doing higher pitch voices, or like on South Park, they pitch shift their voices up to 3 semitones. So you got that. Oftentimes you'll have adult women doing young boy characters, like preteen boys. So like you're gonna have some mismatches unless you want to just do full tilt, like cast children for every child role, which they almost never do that, and for good reason, because they want consistency. But generally speaking, when they do characters who are not white, they want to try to preserve that, with the notable exception of actually Family Guy having the one white voiceover actor doing Cleveland. And
not
which
anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but that was kind of a weird thing, I remember. But like, so in other words, like, you're gonna, yes, that's a really good goal. It's a little less rigid as it is in live action film, because obviously people can't physically see the voice. But yeah, generally you want to do what fits the character, and also to have some degree of representation there. You can get interesting differences though, like the one actor who voices Linda on Bob's Burgers, and the other one who is Tina. They're both men, but their voices just fit the character. So it's one of those things where I think it's a healthy balance.
Girlfriend and Venture Brothers with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh man. But yeah. Okay.
I think we're all speaking to like the main theme of this movie. At its heart, really is diversity. And that's like its message too. It's like anyone can wear the mask. And it's like,
Dustin, have you done your impression yet?
But that's what we're heading as a country. I mean, that's where our world is heading. Trying to let everybody feel as if they're part, and that's the good thing. About this movie is everyone feel like they're a part of this.
Oh yeah. Well, and this also, keep in mind, this also came out in the same year as the film, but the other Marvel film that is in the MCU continuity, which is Black Panther, of course. And that different kind of thing, because that was more specifically focused on I forget exactly which part of Africa Wakanda is supposed to be in. I want to say it's like South Central Africa, like below the 2 Congo nations, something like that. But like that was specifically about a rich, like a culturally and technologically rich African nation being able to open itself up to the world and be able to show its the wealth of its history and culture and its identity, and not be afraid, and also a king learning how to be a king and all that kind of stuff. But like that was a different kind of diversity, but it made a massive impact also in the same year as this one did. And this was obviously more like contemporary America kind of thing, but it
but still, this one speaks more for. I think this one speaks more to to me, this is just me personally. I think this one speaks more to African Americans than Black Panther. I thought Black Panther was a good movie in
Oh,
terms
yeah.
of the idea of that movie, the scope of that movie. I just feel like it was much more commercially kind of trying to get everybody. Whereas this movie, like the dialogue of Miles, is something like I'm telling you, I know those people.
Oh yeah. Well, well, he is also specifically an African American as opposed to the Black Panther. He's a Wakandan, so
which comes from Africa. Well, I mean, it comes from that. But yeah, that's just how I feel about this.
Yeah, it's more immediately relevant to people living in this country today. You know.
So this was actually my first time watching the film.
Really?
Everybody has seen it before me, so I see. I did enjoy it. But I'm looking at it from an angle and a slightly different perspective that I wanted to put out there. I wasn't sure what I would think when I went into this, because I did hear that it was all totally African American. But then I started hearing from Dustin, and then I started hearing from Brandon and all that jazz. I do not go to the theater unless it's something like really, really good. And even so, before meeting Brandon, I didn't consider a cartoon really that something that I should go out and review and discuss before I met Brandon. So
Dave, this is the perfect part then for me to say, quoting Spider-Ham after seeing this, did that feel like a cartoon?
No, it did not. In fact, there were some very interesting camera angles, especially in the very beginning when he was walking to school and shit, where it seemed like it panned around. But the angle that I wanted to say is there are not that many films as well as animations that show the arch enemy in a kind of superhero arch enemy kind of a scenario, show the humanity.
That version of the Kingpin was so good.
Oh yeah,
of the villain
and the Prowler, both of them.
You actually did see that Kingpin when he was fighting with Spider-Man. You saw the anguish that happened as his wife and child were killed in the accident after he fought with Spider-Man, and that's why he blamed him to begin with. So to me, seeing the humanity of the villain. You don't get to see that often.
It helps that Liev Schreiber played Kingpin and did a phenomenal job.
Yeah,
and
that scene with the pen where he's clicking the pen, that's just
And he does have that one great line where he's like, "Not everything's about money, Spider-Man."
Which I mean, the Kingpin which actually kind of funny. The Kingpin in Spider-Man the animated series. He was voiced by I cannot remember the actor's name. He had one of the best voices of all time. He also was the narrator in Babe. He is an African American himself, and he just had that really deep, rich voice. And I remembered, not Clancy Brown. It's Say that one more. Say that one more time. I couldn't quite hear you.
Roscoe Lee Brown.
Yes, that's it. Because he had a brilliant voice. He's up there with Tony J as far as like one of the and Keith David as some of the best voices ever.
Yeah. Well, and also the person that played him in that certain Daredevil movie, Michael Clark Duncan.
He was
good. A good job.
Yeah. Now, I will say, I'm just going to throw this out as a side note. I want to see this done one day. As I said, I have read a lot of the Spider-Gwen comics, and I'm fascinated by the differences in that reality. And in that reality, the kingpin of crime is Matt Murdock, the Daredevil. I love that he is the kingpin in that reality.
What did everyone think of the character?
And wasn't Peter Parker? Was Peter Parker the Lizard in that one?
Yes,
in that reality?
Yes. And that was the story that she alluded to. Her best friend she thought she was responsible for killing her best friend because Peter went all lizard and tried to kill her, and she killed him in self-defense, basically.
Knowing the comics helps a lot with this, but you don't have to know them to enjoy it.
And that's what I like about it, though.
Yeah, getting to my first experience, as we've gone completely out of control from our structure, which we had a good conversation anyway, so I figured I'd just let it flow. But so a bit about my background on this. I generally don't do superhero comics. I know very little. I knew very little about Spider-Man, at least until the Tobey Maguire movies came out, and so that was my perspective for Spider-Man. So when this came out, I was kind of like, I don't know. But then I saw the new Spider-Man in Civil War, and I was like, well, okay, so maybe they can actually tell better stories than Spider-Man 3 was pretty bad. Let's not lie to ourselves.
Like,
Amazing Spider-Man wasn't so bad, but the second one, of course, will.
The second one was great.
Well,
They even gave it a nice little dig in this movie. We don't.
I'm talking about the second Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah, that throwaway joke. But anyway, so I didn't grow up as a Spider-Man fan. I knew the names of some of his villains. But these new Spider-Man movies, just all of them in general, have been totally kicking butt. And I was kind of hyped to see this after it got so much positive buzz. And I think I saw it for the first time after I went and picked up my regular 4K after basically being told that the Steelbook did not exist, which is annoying. But and I loved it. I've seen this movie. This is one of the rare movies where I've watched it of my own volition for fun, not taking it off the shelf because I need to see it to have a discussion on it, or this is a movie that I've just put in to enjoy, and that's kind of rare.
I was somewhat dreading to watch it because I wasn't sure what to expect.
The premise makes it sound really crazy.
It does. It does, and I wasn't sure what I would think about it, and I'm glad that I saved it for a rainy day for this particular discussion. So
I will concede that before the film actually hit theaters, when it was still in trailers and whatnot, I kind of had that same feeling of,
Sony's
just
not
desperate to keep this property alive.
But we're not necessarily known for its love of continuity or plot telling all the time.
And they had, and also this was coming off of Sony had rebooted the property 3 times in 10 years.
Yeah.
It's like,
But that tells me this is a really good movie, man. For it to have, you gotta think really how many fucking Spider-Mans do we have? We have so many different people play that character, so many different versions of the story.
And they added something with this one,
and it played into that too. This is probably the perfect way to deal with that for audiences.
I mean, apparently they even had a scene on the initial outlay. They were looking to have a scene where Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield would reprise their roles, and they ended up not going that route. But I wouldn't be surprised if they do it in the sequel.
I would.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I've seen so many fan mock-ups of live action Spider-Verse things with the various live action Spider-Men all coming back, which would be kind of neat.
See, that's who I thought who was voicing the older Spider-Man, an older Tobey Maguire. For a moment.
It was Chris Pine.
I know, but it kind of sounded slightly like him, in a sense.
Yeah.
So.
I really like the fact that I guess I hadn't really officially given my first impressions of this film, even though I've talked a bit about different aspects of it. But I had not seen this film in the theater, unfortunately, and I felt bad about it. But it was just not a good time in my life for seeing movies in the theater. But I did buy it when it came out physically, and I watched it and really enjoyed it. It seemed like overall a very good celebration of Spider-Man as a whole, but with a special emphasis on Miles Morales, and who I always liked as a character, as a concept. The I think it's one of those things where, and of course the animation, which I have to say, it's one of the very few times that I've really seen American animation really take several massive steps forward. It was, yeah, it was. I can see why someone called it like the Velvet Underground of animation, in the sense that it's already proving to be extremely influential, and I can definitely see that it really did look like a comic book come to life, which is a kind of cliched thing to say, but in this case, it really felt like that because the actual animation style and the character designs, they really did look like their comic book counterparts. But I think the only thing I was kind of wrestling with was when it comes to what's the quote unquote best Spider-Man film ever made, and I'm a terrible one to ask that question to, because like every Spider-Man film, even the not so great ones, I have managed to find some kind of good aspects to it, or something that captures this part of the comics or that part, or it reinvents a character.
Cool. 3 wasn't that bad.
Well, three had Spider-Man 3 had a really good version of the Sandman. I liked, generally speaking, I think it had a good through line with that whole arc. They were just trying to shove Venom in there when they didn't.
Too much.
Exactly. Yeah, they just did too much. But like the Sandman in that film, he really was the link of it all. But like, I've enjoyed them all on some level because I know the comics so well. I've been a Spider-Man fan ever since I can remember, and I've been a comic book fan ever since I can remember. But the big thing I always wrestled with was like, was this the best Spider-Man film ever made? I think it's kind of hard to say because one, it was predominantly a Miles Morales film, and we've only had one of those as of yet, and we've had a bunch of Peter Parker ones. So in other words, there's not really sufficient amounts to compare it to. Plus, this is animation, and you kind of, I don't know. There are a lot of factors that, for me, it's like, well, I don't want to be like unfair one way or the other. I think if you're talking about Spider-Man as a whole, regardless of which Spider-Man you're talking about, like the celebration of the entire legacy of the character, then yeah, that most definitely does that. I think if you're talking about like which one focuses on very heavily on the progression of a specific person as Spider-Man, whether it's Peter Parker or Miles Morales, then you'd have to subdivide a little bit more. Because this was, it was a Miles Morales movie primarily, but Peter Parker has a lot to do. Gwen Stacy has a lot to do. Spider-Ham has a lot to do. They all have their part to play, and so it does. The focus is primarily on Miles Morales, but it does get a little bit more diluted to where I would be hesitant to go too far with that. Now, if they had a dedicated Miles Morales film in the same amount of depth as, like, say, the first two Tobey Maguire ones, then I think that would be a little bit more comparable. But certainly the animation puts it in a very, very special category, and the celebration of the whole legacy of Spider-Man puts it in a special category. I think it's only really fair, I think, to compare the Peter Parker ones kind of next to each other, and then this, unless this has some more similar competition, which I guess technically it will have with the sequel, then you can more fairly compare those to each other.
Can I interject?
It is its own thing.
Because I want to say something about what you just said. I want to piggyback. I think personally, it's a great standalone film, but I think when we look at the sequel and other films to come in this decade, I think there's going to still stand the test of time to be that influential film that made a lot of these other films possible. Now, I think for the
Yeah.
best Spider-Man movie, I still personally think 2 is the best one. I think 2 is still the best
Yeah.
one of that whole entire franchise. But I just think that this movie is going to be such an inspiration to come, because there's a scene in the movie that I really like. It was the scene where Stan Lee is giving him the suit, and he asked,
Yeah.
he's like, "Will this suit fit me?" He was like, "Yeah." He was like, one size fit all, basically. And they were trying to make a joke out of it, but I took it a little bit more. It's like anybody can be Spider-Man. Anyone can don the suit. But the one thing about Miles is it's through his journey that he becomes Spider-Man. And that guy, Miles, is a standalone person, same way Peter Parker had to go through his own journey. But anybody can be Spider-Man in the future.
Apparently, that was a frequent statement on Stan Lee's part, that anyone could wear the mask, and that was something that he believed of the character. But you're right, they kind of played that as a great little joke, because he's a shopkeeper, and he gives that inspirational line, and then right next to him you see no refund ever.
But I took it more literal, kind of like anybody can don this. That was a funny joke. And it's a great comedy. Shit, it's a great comedy, man.
There's tons of humor.
That's the one that I didn't like about the Toby ones a little bit, was the humor wasn't there, but the drama was amazing. But
I think there was some humor, but it was more the Sam Raimi brand of humor.
It didn't always land.
Darker.
That was a problem. But I think I agree. I agree with you. I agree with you about the Spider-Man 2. Like I always wrestle in my head. I always wrestle with between 1 and 2, because 1 will always have a very, very special place in my heart, because I saw that in the theater. I was 10 years old. I had dreamed of seeing Spider-Man on the big screen. I had waited my whole life up to that point to see that, and I was not disappointed. It was like one of the most memorable theater experiences I've ever had in my life. The second one, I think, objectively speaking, it probably is a more because they've already done the origin, you can just tell a really solid, cohesive, singular story. And I think on a script level, it probably is the most that way. It's just, for me personally, I was like, that experience of watching the first movie the first time, I was like, just so it was like, it was the best theater experience I think I've ever had. But
I think you could also really tell that Sam Raimi was playing in a bigger sandbox than he was used to with the first one, and he was much more comfortable the second time.
Right.
Well, that and also he had to do so much proving of what could be done on screen to realize this character's physics and everything that nobody had ever conceptualized before. The best that you ever had was like Superman, which that was its own proving ground technologically, but still that was more about how do you make a character fly, as opposed to how do you make a character swing these tremendous arcs while still being affected by gravity.
Already accomplished the climbing of the walls and stuff like that in the season television series in the 70s. So they had that to look at while going about and doing this. And when I look at aspects of filmmaking, I look at the aspects of what they did with one of the Tarzans. There was an animated version of Tarzan where they looked at skateboarding as
that was the Disney Tarzan.
Oh yeah, the Disney one. Yeah. Oh, you're thinking of skateboarding, surfboarding. They did that as a way to kind of differentiate it, but also to energize the animation style. That was also one of the very first, not the first, but on that scale, they integrated CGI with the 2D animation. And for the most part, it definitely worked and looked pretty seamless. I'm not a huge fan of that film, like story-wise or voice acting-wise, but I think animation-wise, it definitely propelled animation into new territory.
I'd say that the Disney Tarzan story is arguably better than the actual Tarzan story.
Probably, but to get back very quickly to something that Jake had
very heavy on social Darwinism.
Oh, I'm sure.
To a startling degree.
I'm sure, given the time that it was written. But The something
Even
that
for its time, damn.
it's something that Jake said that I wanted to jump on, which was that I think Sam Raimi could he have played up some more of the humor? Yes, but at the same time, I think something that the other Spider-Man films never quite grasped as well as he did was the pathos of the character. And to me, that is what makes Spider-Man. It's like he any humor that at least Peter Parker, Miles Morales is obviously his own character, has similar traits, but he's still his own character. But Peter Parker, at least as a character, any humor that he had was always to try to offset the tremendous tragedy of his life and the continued hardships he faces in a similar way to like a Woody Allen or a similar comedian of the time. And then the other ones, I think that the Amazing Spider-Man films, they played up the romance very heavily, and they did that part of it very well. And then the MCU Spider-Man, they have played up the humor, but also the young rookie Spider-Man. They've played that up very well. And then I think with this, obviously, you got Miles Morales having been established pretty firmly in the animated film sphere, but also the fact that he goes on a similar character trajectory to Spider-Man, but perhaps more of a I could become something bad and I don't want to be that, as opposed to I feel guilty for something bad that I already did or didn't do. My inaction was what got me. So it's more of a threat of turning to the dark side, so to speak, as opposed to having already made a horrifically selfish mistake that had dire consequences.
And from what I understand, that is a big part of the Morales comics, is that struggle of will I go dark or not,
And that's something that like to go back to that larger point, that is something that I think more people can on the whole can relate to, and that's something that's why The Empire Strikes Back, on top of many other reasons, that's why it was always, on top of being, I think, the objective best of the Star Wars films, it was always my favorite, because as a kid even I could relate to Luke's struggle of like, how do I stay on the right path? How do I not go astray? The constant threat of evil. I could always relate to that, and I think a lot of people can, but you do see more of that struggle with Miles Morales rather than lingering guilt over inaction, which due to selfishness. And it's a different conceit for sure, but it's still applicable.
Yeah, and for us to be the age that we are, most of us, and to have seen this, I mean, it really tells you like they really did a great job with the writing. So much depth is in this because he kind of goes through his own Rocky kind of story and stuff. Is that road to redemption, and not just redemption of your opponents, the redemption inside yourself of realizing you do have the ability to win if you try hard.
And if you think about it, speaking of age, when I'm looking at it, and it's interesting watching it at the age I am, where I can look at it and I identify with the Peter B. Parker character a lot.
I do too.
Myself, because he's been through all the heck. He's had all of it. And I was big into Spider-Man, especially in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s when I was a big comic book person. It was one of the ones I was in. And Peter Parker has to have been like one of the most unfortunate characters in all of comics, because if something bad is going to happen socially or in crime fighting or anything, it's going to happen to him. And
in pretty much all the films, he gets blamed for something. Like in this one, Jefferson briefly blames him for killing his brother. He realizes the error of his ways. But the whole thrust of the Harry Osborn story arc in the Sam Raimi films is he gets blamed for killing Norman. You know, and then of course you always had J. Jonah Jameson there ready to throw the blame on him.
And that's something that I really think that's another thing that makes Spider-Man who he is. That because I think that when someone is unfairly blamed for things when they're just trying to do what's right, they can really test their mettle. And numerous times throughout the comics, Peter would go through these periods where he really didn't want to be Spider-Man anymore because because the weight was just too great to bear, and then he had to be reminded of his responsibility. And it's it was more of a cyclical thing, and that's very true to life. And
I mean, when in the movie that thing where he is talking about it, and Miles is like, with great power, don't you finish that line because he knows it's like he doesn't want to deal with that. It's just that's haunting to him.
This had a lot of good jokes.
Yeah.
Like despite that, Spider-Man doesn't wear a cape. That's disrespectful.
Until they got to that one that was
right. He throws the cape and he kind of nods, And I want to throw a random thought out here as a follow-up to that. You could almost say that version, the Peter B. Parker, is sort of the Spider-Man answer to Batfleck in a lot of ways.
Disrespectful.
Oh man!
Sure, why not?
Why not?
We've already succumbed to madness.
Well, something that is interesting when it talks about blame, like the blame that Miles Morales has to go through is more interpersonal, which is not to say that Peter's wasn't, because it most definitely was. But he also had to deal with J. Jonah Jameson. So you also had the idea of kind of media exploitation and painting someone bad for the sake of sensationalism and for the sake of kind of a personal grudge and jealousy. And, so that's on a massive scale, but then with something like this, what he's having to go through is more interpersonal and small scale and nonetheless effective. But then also with blame and guilt, part of why Wilson Fisk, why he's doing what he's doing is out of guilt and out of feeling like he needs to do everything in his power to get his family back, which, as megalomaniacal as the Kingpin was, he did have a love for his wife and son that transcended it all, even though he was not by any means a great husband or father.
At least this version, anyway.
Well, that this version, but also in the comics too.
Yeah.
Because there were so many different versions of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also with comics, there's one thing that you run into that you don't get to run into with a lot of genres is different takes on the same character within the same universe. And sometimes even total personality changes because of the person writing it changing.
Right.
And the Kingpin in one point in time is very different from the Kingpin in this point in time, even in the same universe, not just in the Ultimate Universe, which is that different Kingpin. And that's one of the biggest flaws, which that's why DC decides we're going to reset every 5
And
years.
I don't think that we would have had this Spider-Verse without the fact of them having multiverses in the different variations of the television versions that have been on the WB,
or even going back further, like I said, with the Spider-Man the Animated Series, which even that is, even the comics were doing that, long before. So yeah, we're having a good kind of ripple effect in all those different areas. And I would have thought something that was rather applicable for this film in terms of the whole, let's get everybody all together in one movie kind of thing. What I thought of off the bat was the Lego movie, or more specifically the Lego Batman movie.
Well, this is by the guys who did the Lego movie.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's kind of what it made me think of for obvious reasons. But I do think the big difference is that unlike say the Lego movie, which was a bunch of different elements from every license that Lego has ever touched, or even the Lego Batman movie, which it's Batman, but it's through the Lego filter. The difference here is that but the difference here is that this is pure, like it's different versions of Spider-Man, but it is all more heavily focused in one specific brand and one specific or multiple different versions of that same brand, but it is a little bit less scattershot. Now granted, the Lego movie was able to take all those disparate elements and put them all together into something really, really good. And this did too. It was just kind of nice that, oh, look at that, it's still more or less, on brand singularly. Like they didn't have to draw from a lot of different well springs. They could keep it kind of in the family, so to speak, and do it really well.
Yeah. I like how this has turned into like a full-on referendum on Spider-Man, like in the franchise's totality. And
a referendum in what way?
In that where breaking down literally everything.
Well, I mean, I think I would call it a celebration of everything, because I think the movie is that way. It is enough to where, like, they did a tremendous amount of really good visual homages to not only the comics, but specific moments from the various movies, not just the Sam Raimi ones, but the other ones as well. And the comic designs, some designs that were kind of fusions of the comics and the movies. And also even the post-credit scene, they paid homage to the 60s cartoon, and it's like, the one that has become very meme worthy, and it's like, that.
Oh, I enjoyed that so much.
That was great. Yeah.
Especially since Spider-Man 2099 is my favorite incarnation of Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see him. I'd love to see Miguel O'Hara make an appearance. I'd love to see the 2099 universe come into existence in some way as a whole.
Oh yeah,
that would be really
itself,
cool.
And that X-Men comic of that time period was so dark, but it was it was amazing in how they did
My
it.
favorite characters was murdered in the third issue, something like that. It was pretty dark, but
it was very of its time, admittedly, like very like 90s futurist, all that stuff. But at the very least, it was set in the way distant future. It was not meant to be contemporary times, and it wasn't what you saw with a lot of 90s comics, where it was needless power armor for no reason, and it was needless costume changes for no reason, or it was
and lots of pouches.
Lots of pouches. Thanks, Rob Liefeld. But it wasn't that, but it was able to do something different. And now, granted, Spider-Man did have his power armor at one point, but that was really short lived. But yeah, it's I would love to see that come back. I mean, actually, if you wanted to talk about that, like,
you're the one pointing at me. No, you're pointing. You stop pointing.
That was funny. I would love to see, like, if you've played like the Spider-Man game from 2000, or even the new one from Insomniac, like you see all the different costumes. It would be cool. Like you saw some of those in that the Spider Cave or whatever that was. You saw some
Spidey-mobile.
Exactly. Well, you saw different costumes there, and that was really cool. I think it would be cool to just see what other kinds of iterations of it they could work in. And there are so many great looks. Not my favorite of which is easily the symbiote suit. But like you also have like the spider armor, the silver kind. You have just so many great looks. Captain Universe, that'd be kind of neat if they could work that in.
And incidentally, talking about different looks and whatever, a quick note on all the different 6 main spider people. All 3, Peter B. Parker is older. There's a lot of basically fat jokes at his expense, which do out pretty well. He's not really fat, but he's more average.
Staying in shape, doing crunches.
He has a dad bod, as they call it.
Right. But then you also have Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy both have very distinct looks as spider people. Gwen in particular, her suit is unique among the Spider-Man characters. And the comics are more traditional, and they're animated more traditionally, but each of them has a very distinct look. But then you got Peter Parker is obviously a Looney Tune cartoon. I mean, he's Spider-Man Noir he's always got wind blowing his trench coat. They even make a comment on that. Where's that wind coming from? And he's animated with different shading than any of the others, with no color. He's obsessed with Rubik's Cube for whatever reason. The color fascinates him. And then Penny is drawn very explicitly in anime style. And I love that they went that route, she is just straight up right out of an anime.
Well, Penny is an character as well,
then,
because she brings about that animatronic Pacific Rim character.
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and let's not forget with Spider-Man Noir, not only his vernacular is very authentic to the period, but also like his when he's trying to teach Miles Morales how to fight, like he has that old school stick 'em up kind of boxing stance, and that was really good. Which actually that just reminded me of something. You'll be happy to know. So the second family dog that we got, I actually named all of the animals, and I named him Miles after Miles Morales, and also Miles Tails Prower from Sonic, but mostly Miles Morales, because I was looking through all the different like comic book character names just for inspiration. I was like, Miles, that's a good name, and so I thought that was worth mentioning.
Well, for a second there, I thought you were going to say there's one scene in I think it's in the big climactic battle where Cage, on Spider-Man Noir, punches someone out, and you see in the big bold letters, applesauce. Of course, my favorite graphic is when they're running from the lab and one of them throws a bagel and it hits one in the head, and you see bagel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of getting into 60s Batman a bit.
Well, they make an interesting point in the commentary, and I love this when they point it. I never noticed it, but when I watched it again, I was like, I get that. Yes, which was the when Miles gets bitten by the spider. That's when you start seeing graphics on the screen. You don't see it before that.
Right.
So I thought that was kind of fun that they brought it in that way. And there was one other thing they brought in when that happened. Oh, it was the split panels. That they didn't do that beforehand.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. Except I think in that opening sequence with Spider-Man, the introduction, I think they did it.
I gotta ask a question: is Doc Ock in the actual that's in this? Is she actually the wife of Dr. Octopus, who we're so used to seeing in the comics, or is she her own character?
I think in this one they just turned her female for the sake of the film. I don't think the Ultimate one was a female.
Okay. No, well, the Ultimate Universe one was male. But I think you're right that it was female for, again, they got multiple universes and everything, so it's like, anything goes at this point. But yeah, traditionally, in the Ultimate Universe, Otto Octavius is a man. Which what made the Ultimate Universe version of Dr. Octopus interesting was that his tentacles were metal, but they also had some kind of almost molten metal aspects to them, to where they could shapeshift, and they could have like guns on the ends of them, things like that. They could do more than the traditional tentacles could do. Plus, that Otto Octavius, he figured out very, very quickly that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, which that does say a lot for his intellect. Which, Otto Octavius as a character, always that was his big claim to fame. And and Norman Osborn too, but in a different way, more like a business acumen kind of way, whereas Octavius was more like a traditional scientist.
Right.
And but still, it is interesting when you see a character like that kind of reinvented.
Yeah, 'cause I didn't
liked
know. I was
the
thinking that
yeah.
I did like it. I just didn't know if that was his wife or not. They were trying to like go that route instead of dealing with him, like deal with his wife. But I remember his wife dying. But
No, I didn't get that.
I loved how they did the tentacles.
yeah, I did like how they did the tentacles.
Because they did that, like, that's very different. That kind of almost elastic, almost plastic,
Yeah.
or not quite rubber or plastic or whatever it was, but that just artificial but malleable nature. I thought it was really cool, a really cool take.
I
And
also
like the real Dr. Octopus, just one-on-one, straight up fight, Spider-Man really didn't stand a chance straight up. He had always.
But he went invisible on that fight with her. So to me, having the ability to go invisible is an added feature to the Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, and that's something that's great about Miles Morales as a character, is that his power set covers off the necessary bases of Spider-Man, but he is able to do more things than Peter could. I think that's pretty cool. It's a good way to distinguish him. Which it's interesting with the Green Goblin in the film. And this was a changeover that was done in the Ultimate Universe from day one. Was the more like, for lack of a better word, like goblin, like ogre, like dragon, like version of the character, who was more of a monster rather than someone in a suit. And it's an interesting. Well, it's cool to see that version on screen in some way. I've always, just because it's traditional, I've always preferred the version that's in a suit on a glider and everything. But that version of it is cool in its own right. It's more of like a monster, more of a dragon who can actually generate fire from his hands and everything.
More like the hobgoblin
Right.
in a way,
Yeah,
or demon goblin, really, as you go. But
even Hobgoblin, he even flew on a glider.
Did you
like
like
talk about some of the
Raimi.
old ones? I always thought that the one that they mishandled the most was not Norman Osborn, but Harry Osborn.
Yeah.
To me, I thought that character had some of the best development in the Spider-Man universe, and is one that's not used as properly as
They were on
they
the right.
used
They were
to.
on the right
And,
track with the Raimi films, but they had to rush it because of that studio mandate.
Yeah. I mean,
It
I
would-
like that he got
the
addicted
version-
to substances, and he was obsessed with the death. I mean, one of my favorite comics of Spider-Man, and it's been a long time. You go back to the hologram cover ones
Yeah.
that they did, where you saw like the fight where he supposedly dies,
Right.
and you see that moment. He's just obsessed because the drugs have corrupted his mind,
Yeah.
and then he ends up eventually coming back to reality and saving them, and just dies saying, well, of course I'd save you, you're my friend, you're my best friend.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of writing I like to see with that. And so it kind of makes it weird with it. Yeah.
I had a total computer crash.
Sorry about that.
So you noticed I was gone, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The version of Harry that I really love, besides the comics, and I do think he was done very well in the Sam Raimi films, and for as brief of a time as he had in Amazing Spider-Man 2, I really like Dane DeHaan as a actor, and I think he was a good choice. But a version of Harry outside of the comics that you should check out if you haven't already is from the Spider-Man the animated series from the 90s. That version of Harry's done really, really well. You get the pressure. You get the pressure that he is under from Norman, and also why he's trying so hard to prove himself, and why he would eventually become the second Green Goblin. And then if you want something a little bit more, a little different, the version in the Spectacular Spider-Man is good because they actually go straight to Harry and they go around Norman as far as becoming the Green Goblin, which was a good way to change up our expectations.
And if I recall correctly, I could be remembering this wrong, but I think that's what they did in the Spider-Gwen comics too, because Harry was best friends with Peter and Gwen and was furious at her, blaming her for Peter's death, if I'm remembering correctly.
Oh.
And I think he actively took the drugs as a way to fix the problem. I could be remembering that wrong, but I feel like that. I know he was set up as a chief antagonist.
And in here, you get the Spider-Man character who starts out with like almost zero friends.
Yeah.
He's new to the school, you know.
Well, he's got the friends he grew up with, you know.
But he doesn't have that kind of person that you can hang out and have a bro time with, you know. You know,
right. He doesn't have a Ned.
And that's very quick aside. That is one thing that, I mean, I'm a huge fan. I think Spider-Man's supporting characters are some of the best in all of comics. And Stan Lee, especially in the early comics, did a really, really good job of fleshing out and giving his supporting cast a lot of weight, a lot of personality, a lot of development. And as much as I would like to have seen, well, and they did start to integrate them in a little bit more heavily as the new MCU series has gone on. I do like seeing like the Liz Allen and the usual crowd. As much as I like seeing that, but the new characters are like with Ned, like he's kind of a composite character of Ned Leeds and a couple other supporting characters. He's a composite. I do like seeing what they're doing with that, and also with someone like Michelle Jones, because she really is her own character. She's not someone that we've really seen before. Like she, her initials are MJ, but she's not at all Mary Jane Watson, nor is she Gwen Stacy, nor is she Betty Brant. She's just her own character, and a pretty interesting one. A good counterpoint for that version of Peter, because she seems almost like Daria or something, like very sardonic, very kind of anti-charismatic in a very deliberate way.
She's a modern version of those characters, really.
Yeah,
She's what those characters would be in the current society and in current life.
Yeah.
there is a character
definitely.
that we did not touch on, and I want to touch on her, Aunt May.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
Lily
Like when she
Tomlin.
hits him with the bat. It's the scorpion with the bat.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was Tombstone, wasn't it?
where was she?
No,
Tombstone, yeah, sorry.
Outside.
Where
Keep
was
in
her
mind, I watched the alternative cut, which has that fight extended.
Uh,
I want that kind of Aunt May in the Spider-Man universe. You know, I mean,
What?
she came off as like this timid-looking character, and then all of a sudden she was like, "Follow me," and then she was like kind of kick-ass because she knew exactly what to do, and it's like she was like Spider-Man's like as in Bruce Wayne to Alfred as Aunt May was to Spider-Man,
Yeah. Which, I mean,
yeah,
if
we
you
all
read
have
the if you read the comics, and you get to certain points in the continuity where she does know Peter's identity, when you get to those points, then and she's left alive. You do see more of the strength of her as a person, which I mean, the strength was always there in Aunt May as a character, but you just get to see it more directly. And the I've liked every version of Aunt May that we've seen. Even something as different as Marissa Tomei, like even then, like I think she did something cool and different with it. And actually all of them did. I think Rosemary Harris is by far the most traditional, and the most like lifted straight from the comics interpretation. And then Sally Field, she was very much lifted from Ultimate Spider-Man. And then Marissa Tomei was something fresh and different, and a little bit more applicable to like what a realistic like kid of whatever age would have, not like an elderly person. And so this one I think seemed to be drawing from the later period in the comics where she knows Peter's identity and is able to really show that strength of character, because she always has, even before she said she knew.
One could almost make parallels between her portrayal on screen and Alfred's, because you got the Rosemary Harris is sort of like the Michael Gough version of Alfred. You know what I mean? Like
definitely
one, the kind of traditional, and then the Marissa Tomei is probably closer to the Sean Connery version, and then you got Tomlin's like the Michael Caine version. You know.
Yeah,
you kind of get a sense that this universe of Spider-Man had an easier time of it than, well, Peter B. Parker, but that's not saying much. I like in that scene where he's like, "Oh yeah, we all have this, this little shed. We keep a little bit of extra supplies, and then it opens up into this giant
futon.
It turns into like the Bat Cave, and he's like, "Be honest, well, I've got a futon." He's trying not to be jealous.
This movie really benefited from the fact that it came out so later. It had all these other things they could draw upon to actually incorporate into the story, into the making of it, that makes it so fucking great. I mean,
I
don't know if this movie would have been as great if it came out in 2012.
And it also
it wouldn't have.
Well, it came out in the wake of the MCU and all these other Spider-Man films and all this other the Nolan Batman films and all that stuff. So superheroes have become more mainstream, more accepted. But also there's been a little bit more, still not as much as I'd like. It's still criminally not there. What Dave was touching on at the start, there's still not as much respect as there could be for animation in general, but there's starting to be more, and they got this really high wattage cast. I mean, you got Nicolas Cage and Liev Schreiber and Mahershala Ali and Brian Tyree Henry and Shameik Moore and Haley Steinfeld, and that is not a lightweight cast. Those are really, really, really talented actors. And
we were talking about race and that's impact with this movie at the beginning, and I did want to say, as far as looking at this from a perspective, there's two types of really high impactful movies as far as racial diversity is concerned. One is the type that people look at and they say, okay, 12 Years a Slave, Amistad, things like that. Ones that are just so powerful that they hit you hard. But to me, the other type is those that you see the inclusion and you can see it on the surface, but as you get into the movie, you do not see it at all.
Yeah, well, it's on a more subconscious level. It's a more like kind of it's less like the ones you mentioned. Those are like historic films, and they obviously reflect an important part of history, a very dark, ugly part of it. With something like this and something like Black Panther, that's more of like not only contemporary, but it's also more on a more subconscious level, and it's more of an uplifting kind of, this is what we can be, this is and even more so, this is who we are, and this is the kind of world that we live in, and we can get even more this way in the future.
My problem with Black Panther compared to this is just I thought it was a great concept. I answered that earlier. My problem was I just didn't feel like it overall really touched on as much as it could. I don't know. I think that's just a commercial aspect of that film trying to appeal to everybody. But this movie, though, the one thing I like is that what it touched on was for him to be a kid of two different races that are both considered minorities. He becomes the person who people of a different color really put their faith in, and he at first doesn't even think that he's capable, of doing it. Like he says to himself, he says to them, like, "No, I can't do it." And then they actually think to themselves later on, like, "Yeah, maybe he's not the right person for the job." But it becomes that kid who's half Latino and half African American that he saves the day, and it's not about the fact that he's those two, races. It's just this guy saves the day. He was the underdog that came out on top.
Yeah.
And I think if more movies actually went that route, you wouldn't have a lot of people who are trolls or stuff, come out and say, well, this movie is pandering or anything. Nah, this movie is not pandering. This movie is just a great story.
Yeah, great story.
Never
And even more, like you said with Black Panther, like not only did they have to fit that into the larger already established continuity, so there was that, but also the fact of the matter is it's about someone who is having to learn how to be a good king and how to bring his country into the rest of the world and out of secrecy. And that does not apply to most people. Whereas, being someone who has to believe in himself. And
let me say this about that, though. One thing I'll say about T'Challa is not just weary of Caucasians. I mean, he's actually weary of his own people, which is funny because at the end of the movie, he actually comes to the actual supposed hood or ghetto and actually sets up shop there to help build a better future for those young people. But at first, he did not give a damn about them. I mean, let's just be upfront
That's why many tend to identify more with Killmonger
than
they do with T'Challa.
Killmonger was such a cool villain too.
Oh yeah, he was.
Did we talk about
the
villains in Spider-Verse?
A little.
Talked about the Kingpin.
They went with very
Dr. Octopus.
They went with very different versions of those characters. And I really enjoyed that, like especially like the gender swapped Dr. Octopus. Like that was a cool idea.
I enjoyed the gender swap. I wasn't as fond as the beasted up Green Goblin.
Yeah, he was like a monster.
Yeah,
I saw that.
Used a different character
something
for
between
that.
a gargoyle and something else,
Well, it's not such a shock if you've read Ultimate Spider-Man because that got established pretty early on.
I did like one moment in particular with Doc Ock, and that was the part where she's talking about like, you must be in a lot of pain. You're probably going to start to disintegrate, and I, for one, can't wait to see what happens. And it's just the way she says that is like, oh, that's creepy.
It's like, wait a minute, like, and you don't know she's this universe's Dr. Octopus until that moment.
She's just this science lady that's that's on the video.
Yeah, definitely throws us for a loop there, and that's a good aspect of whenever you're able to do something that does play with the audience's expectations and having an amalgam of different universes. That is a good way to do that.
And they actually had a couple of reveals in this one. Kingpin, you pretty much know from the get-go what he's all about,
Oh yeah.
But I mean, you see him as the villain, and then you learn that he's really got an actual motive that's, But like you get two reveals. You get the reveal with Doc Ock, and you get the reveal with the Prowler, who you come to find out is Uncle Aaron. And that is a really good moment too, because you got the Miles has gone to his uncle for help, for assistance. He's scared. He doesn't know what's going on. And then he recognizes the Prowler about to enter the apartment. And then he hears him talking to Kingpin, and he takes off the mask, and then Miles is like, oh,
That actually got me emotionally. I have to admit that actually got me emotionally because when he realized that was his uncle, like I really did feel bad for him because he really looked up to him. And I actually
Right.
liked the character up until that point. It's like, wait a second, this is the guy. Like, I mean, you have that
Right.
reveal moment, and when he dies, I mean, I really feel his pain. Like, I
Yeah.
really feel his pain because
I did too.
Well,
he-
and
I mean, who doesn't have that black sheep in the family that's done something or is doing something to the point of almost criminal in a way? Not
did you
to
guys
the level of the Prowler, obviously, but you know.
right? But did you
and
guys
that,
get that sense of like because there's a scene earlier when the dad was in the bed with the mom and they were talking, and
Mhm.
he has to call the brother and he goes to voicemail, but you could tell like the dad didn't want to do it because you know there's some kind of history there that we do not see in the movie.
Yeah.
And it was like at that moment when we found out really who he is when he enters the actual window, it's like, wow. Now I
Which is why I think he was a character that I think Miles would go to because um, maybe because of whatever dark history that the father and the brother seem to have, that
No,
that
do
unspoken.
There's like a little dig in there that really kind of shows you that maybe there's something. Because remember when he was talking about his dad being a cop, he said it very kind of like flippantly, but we don't really know what the reasoning is behind it. But then it makes sense once we realize he's Prowler.
do y'all ever think like he knew that it was the Prowler? That
I think
his
he did.
I don't think he knew. But I think he knew his brother was up to something.
I think that was part of the backstory because again, Jeff Davis used to be part of the Shield. He used to be a Shield agent, and if memory serves, or maybe it's different in this version, but I feel like he knew about Aaron. And that was one of the reasons he was so dismissive of him with Miles, because he was trying to steer him away. If that, but I could be wrong on that. But
Well,
I think that.
that's a very common thing, like you said, that there's a black sheep or there's a family member that they're like, oh, he's no good or whatever, and then the kid naturally gets curious and wants to be around that person more because he may want to.
They think it's more.
I mean, for those people who've had that black sheep in the family, that person who is just kind of out there and kind of shirking regular societal expectations, they're charismatic typically. They're the ones that that have that enticement. I
Right.
know, like I know from a lot of the times they were fascinating to me. Those people who they didn't play by the same rules as everybody else, and they were that cool person to a child, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
And that's really what Miles is. And you can say, I mean, he's not some adult that somebody else is writing. He is a teenager, and
Right.
he has those same faults that teenagers have, and that makes him
That's
even
why-
more human.
That's why I
Well, and
think
then
his story was better.
go ahead.
That's why I think his origin story was better than Peter's in a way. Because even when you look at the actual like live action, when you look at the one with Tobey Maguire, it's like we know he's a teenager, but Tobey Maguire looks so much like an adult. It's like
Oh, I know.
we don't really feel that sense of going through kind of a little
Yeah.
bit of an age bump. But with Miles, it's like we really feel that coming of an age. We see him in high school and how he's awkward and how he doesn't fit in and how he's typical.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
what I think sets up for the better drama. That's what I think sets up for the better drama.
Well, and then on kind of the flip side, this was something that I, as a lifelong Peter Parker fan and someone who I could relate to significantly, it was interesting that we got to see, because most Spider-Man, well, films, but also Spider-Man fiction in general, they tend to not let Peter get past a certain age or past a certain life trajectory or certain life milestones. And generally speaking, they tend to get to, well, he's married to Mary Jane and trying to make that work and everything. And you have people who have different philosophies about whether or not a hero should ever be married or whatever. And that's why you had the infamous One More Day storyline. But they never really let him get to that stage where he's sort of middle-aged and a little past his prime, except for like Spider-Man Reign, which that was kind of that was kind of alternate kind of what if story. But it's interesting here where you get to see him kind of on the outs with Mary Jane and kind of shirking responsibility, and like I think he's kind of going through his own midlife crisis in a way. So he's kind of doing the opposite of a Miles Morales because he's gone through his major trauma, but now he's having to deal with something that is very, I'm sure, relatable to people his age. That his marriage is kind of on the outs. He's feeling like he doesn't really know his place in the larger scope of what it means to be Spider-Man himself, and so his arc parallels Miles, except that Miles is learning that he has what it takes to be Spider-Man the Spider-Man of this world, but that Peter is learning that he has what it takes to be not only the Spider-Man of his world again, but even more so to be the husband he needs to be. And I'm sure that is something that people of that age group can relate to.
Would you guys?
Well, I mean, the whole story with him. I mean, that's one that's been retold a couple of times, with him having a child and worrying about what effects will the radioactive spider bite have on my child.
Yeah.
I mean, shoot, there's one that has him like that has his child being born and then stolen from him by Norman Osborn.
Yeah, killed in the womb. And
to his thought anyway.
Yeah, well, and then like the Spider Girl, that whole continuity of comics, which was an alternate timeline where the child lived, that whole thing, which that was her costume was based on Ben Reilly's costume, which that reminds me, the blonde haired Peter Parker in Miles Morales' world. That one reminded me a lot of Ben Reilly, but it wasn't Ben Reilly, but it definitely visually it paid homage to Ben Reilly. And that also reminds me, in the sequel, not only do we have to see Spider-Man, from the Toei Spider-Man, not only do we need to see that, but we need to see the short-lived Indian Spider-Man that was published for the Indian market in India. It was Peter Parker. So it was a different way of spelling it, but he had a pretty interesting costume. And it's like, oh, that'd be kind of neat.
Well, and actually, you talk about like the older Spider-Man is gone a little further in life. Like, my understanding is that currently he is like the CEO of his own company that rivals Stark's company, but Mary Jane's working for Tony Stark, and that's kind of a fun. But she has her own spider suit, so it'd be interesting to see if she gets brought in as.
Yeah, she does in that particular version of where Mary Jane and his daughter and their daughter, they also are spider people as well, which that's kind of interesting.
I'm talking about the one where Tony Stark just made her a suit close to what they have in the movies, like a mechanized spider suit or something.
Yeah.
But like, yeah. But
it's basically what we're saying, kids, is that comics it is a blank canvas, and
right.
Basically, anything can happen and probably will at some point.
Like in this one, we find out Chris Pine has a lovely singing voice with that Christmas album that's by Peter Parker.
Yeah.
What? He's got a nice voice.
Well, yeah, he did. He sang in Into the Woods. Not all that great, but he could have been a lot worse.
It was a boring.
That's always something that I find really. It's one of those things that like outsiders tend to laugh at about comics, but it's something that I kind of rejoice, which is that in the world of comics, really anything that can happen, anything can happen, and characters that you think have been dead forever, they can inexplicably come back, and
especially Jean Grey, especially Jean
Grey. Well, and one of the bigger ones was Bucky having come back as the Winter Soldier, which they thankfully did integrate into the MCU. It's just that's one of the great things about comics as a medium, is that no matter how ridiculous it gets, no matter how many continuity resetting major crossover events, which that's more of a DC thing than necessarily a Marvel thing, even though they've done a few, but not nearly as many, and not nearly as many like systemic altering, status quo altering ones like DC's done. But the point is that, no matter how ridiculous that gets, it's like it's always entertaining to just see what kind of wackiness they'll come up with next.
Well, apropos of nothing, speaking of wackiness, well, I don't know if it is, but anything can happen. One thing that does intrigue me a lot, getting back to the brothers of Aaron and Jefferson. Aaron is played by Mahershala Ali, and Brian Tyree Henry plays Jefferson. I love that at the same time this film came out, the father who plays the cop here, was playing a corrupt politician in Widows, whereas Aaron was playing theoretically a musician of some prominence in Green Book. It's like they had almost reversed roles in a way for this film, which is kind of fun. But there's what's up?
I was gonna say it's also funny because Mahershala Ali played a cop in True Detective, like not before that.
He has done a lot of and he's usually played upstanding characters. So this one, and it is interesting. Just random bit of trivia. He's the first Muslim to win 2 Oscars, apparently. So that's kind of but again, a little bit on the diversity there. But
is he going to play Blade? I heard he was going to play Blade, but is he actually going to play?
Yeah, I heard that too.
He did what?
He was going to play Blade, the superhero Blade.
I heard that he's in.
That'd be cool to see.
That would be very cool to see.
Yeah, I really hope he does take that.
He is announced to play Blade. Yeah, they just need to get the movie made.
I think that's a superhero that really one of the first, to be honest.
He did play a villain in Alita Battle Angel. I forgot about that, but anyway,
we don't think about that.
Oh, I love that movie. Yeah.
I still haven't seen it, but it's certainly the collaboration of Robert Rodriguez and James Cameron. I mean, that alone is historic and interesting because they both do things that are off the beaten track that still influence the mainstream. But it's also one of the few anime or manga inspired things where the main character has the big eyes and everything. So it's like, hey, that's kind of cool to see something that more closely resembles what what the source material is. And not in which even something like Speed Racer, which a lot of people hated, like at the very least it was doing something really, really stylistically bold and something that
that's my favorite of his films.
I think those two. I saw a recent. I think it was Anime America did a list of the best and worst anime adaptations, and I think those two were their top 2.
Yeah, well, Speed Racer definitely. Which we're talking about that, and not Spider-Man, but like that definitely had its own style, and it did things that people to this day still haven't done that extensively, or that that stylistically, that bold, that different, that utterly unique. And you could definitely say the same with the animation in this film. And anybody that tries to copy it, they will just be copying. Because it really, I mean, technically, I guess, I don't know if you'd call it 3D with 2D stylings or what, but like it really was its own animal. And I think that alone, even if you're not a Spider-Man fan, like that alone is enough to make it historic.
They went all out with the animation. They did 3D modeling. They did 2D animation overlaid over the modeling. They did the frame rate was halved, which helped give it a little bit more of that comic-y feel a little bit. They did all kinds of cool stuff. And as far as the art of the movie, I also want to do a shout out to the music. Daniel Pemberton did a hell of a score. But apparently he composed the score, recorded on vinyl, and then had a world-class DJ scratch it up to make it more fit the vibe of what they were going for musically. But I'm like, that's kind of cool. I like that. Plus, they had several original songs, and some of them were pretty. It's a crime that this film wasn't up for Oscars for the music, if nothing else.
Oh yeah, but the Oscars in music, they're just beyond fucked anyway. But
it's Exhibit A that they need a Best Animation category.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you could think about voice acting and everything else.
Voice acting, yes.
What you said with the music, it reminded me of something that Tarantino did for Django Unchained. Was that a lot of the songs that he picked, like the specific recordings of them, he lifted from his own personal vinyl copies that had some of the imperfections of the old vinyl. And I thought, hey, yeah, exactly. And I was like, hey, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Sometimes the imperfection really makes the film.
Yeah.
How many films do you look at from further back and they've cleaned them up and you're going, well, shoot, this needs to be a little bit more grainy here. It does happen.
With my film, Eternus, that I did, with the one talking segment, I tried my best to emulate the sound of like the first, like what the first talkies would have sounded like, that style of, or even like a really, really, really old vinyl record. The way that those vocals sounded, they sounded very kind of almost ghost-like, because they're so unlike the super, super clear recordings that we're used to today.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed.
Yep.
So let's talk about favorite scenes, if we can, so that we can start to wind down here. So just to go around the board, KJ, what would have been your one of your favorite scenes from this particular animation?
Hard, because you got some drama, you got some comedy. Favorite scene? I think I'm gonna stick with, because I said it earlier, just because it meant something to me. Was when the Stan Lee scene. That really meant a lot to me, because I really did feel and believe that when he gave him that suit, it was like he was passing the torch to him, and he was letting him know, look, you might be black, you might be Miles Morales, you might be somebody that most people might not be familiar with on a commercial level, but you know what? You can don the suit. You're worthy to don the suit. And I mean, that's how I feel about anybody. You can do anything that you want to do. And that's how I felt about that character. And I was glad that he was able to have his own standalone movie. And I look forward to the next decade, really, because there should be at least another couple of sequels that can come from Miles Morales.
Oh yeah, and rest in peace, Stanley.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, what about your favorite scene of this film? What would you take from it?
It's kind of difficult to pick a favorite scene because there's so much to enjoy. I mean, I could go with the scene where they actually, where I could go with the death of Spider-Man, which is something that I definitely hadn't seen before and did not expect.
Yeah.
Just the whole aftermath of people getting the news. Like, it's a very moving scene.
Mm-hmm.
There's also like when Miles, puts on his suit and does his leap of faith moment. Like, that was pretty exciting. Like, there's just so much to enjoy. It's really difficult to pick a singular favorite.
Okay.
Well, that scene has become like the iconic moment in the film where he's like, he jumps off the building and you see him rising up as well. That was cool.
Since you were just
especially that reversal too. Did anybody notice that when he falls earlier, like they do like the illustrated like as he falls down, and then after he's gotten his suit and he's swinging around, they have him rising up in the same way, but they have the words "woo" like following.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or another fun moment. Did anybody notice when they break into the lab and they steal a bagel and he throws it and they throw it at like their pursuers? Like the word bagel actually pops up like as a sound effect when it hits somebody in the face.
Yeah, we said that.
That was glorious. So
I
that
did like
whole
the bagel
scene-
was a part of the plan.
Yes, it's an integral part of the
Actually,
plan.
I don't
And
know if anybody.
I like how one of them shouted, "They stole a bagel!"
It's like nobody will miss a bagel, and they immediately missed the bagel. Did anybody notice? Did anybody notice that Doc Ock knew that the other dimensional versions couldn't survive in her dimension,
Right.
and she didn't tell Kingpin that?
True.
So
Right.
she just wants to do the experiment. Like she doesn't care about
Oh yeah.
actually
Oh, yeah.
meeting Kingpin's goals.
Well, like
Oh, yeah.
real Doc Ock would be.
Oh, exactly. But I just felt that was kind of a subtle thing about her character that I didn't notice until this viewing. So I just wanted to be sure somebody pointed it out.
Well, it's like I said, that creepy excitement in her voice where she said, "I can't wait to see." That was just, she's a scientist first and foremost, just a deluded, demented one. Yeah.
Jake, what scene would you take from this film?
Oh, there's so many. There's really so many great moments. It's really hard to pick one. And we've already mentioned a couple. And a couple of them, like when little moments, like when Fisk says it's not always about the money, when Aunt May slaps Tombstone out of the house with a bat and says, "I said take it outside." There were great moments, but I'll go ahead and mention, I'll try and think of at least one that I haven't mentioned yet that I loved was the big reveal of Spider-Woman. The big reveal, the big introduction of Gwen Stacy as Spider-Woman. That's just a great scene. She comes in, she kicks ass and takes names, and then she, Miles has that we go, "I like your haircut." You don't get to like that. Just that great little even though she's really friendly to him, she does not like what he did.
What he did to her hair.
Right. But I love her as a character, so I love that nice kick-ass introduction. And she gets another great moment in the battle with Scorpion where she like does that big flip over the roofs and whatever. So those are probably and when Spider-Ham says, "Did that feel like a cartoon?" I love that.
Yeah.
Yes. That was good.
Okay, and Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about maybe something that you enjoyed from this film?
I had two things. I mean, one, I really enjoyed the initial scene where he's bonding with his uncle, and he's painting that graffiti on the wall, and seeing it, and you can see just the feeling in it that like expectations with the kind of with that person with the outline of himself there,
Right.
that just kind of sums up all of his feelings right then and there. But also at the same time, that scene where, as Dustin said, that scene where where people are reacting to the death of Spider-Man, with the music in the background, seeing how everybody, no matter who it was, no matter what race or what length, they're all like just so stricken by it. They're all afraid, as
Yeah, and even his dad, it's like, "Do you really hate Spider-Man?" "Well, yeah." And it clearly like shocks him too. So plus he seems to have a moment where it's when they reveal, how young Spider-Man really is. Like he seems to kind of, get why Spider-Man would be so like brash.
Right.
That was something that he complained about in their conversation in the car. So I liked that little bit of extra depth in that scene too. Which thanks for reminding me to point that out.
Dane, if you could choose a scene from the film at any given point in time, what would it be?
I was really struggling to think of that once you asked it because, like, the thing with this film is just because of the way it's animated, so many of the scenes and the moments they really kind of run together in a very almost stream of consciousness way, just because of how unique how unique the animation is, and how unique the editing process is, and everything. As far as individual moments, I really loved everything that was like a specific homage to something I recognized visually, but those are more little bits here and there. As far as a specific moment or scene, the part that I kept coming back to was I think when you can start to kind of see Wilson Fisk's family come through the portal, and I think that whole aspect of his character in that moment that really helped to humanize Wilson Fisk in a way that we typically don't see, or at least not to the degree that we should. And so I felt like that really gave him a very believable motivation for why he did what he did. And it's something that, like, when Spider-Man villains, and Spider-Man as a concept, when those things, when they're at their best, I think it's the humanization and the pathos that really makes those characters, not just Spider-Man himself, but the villains. Because usually when they're at their best, what they want is not really anything too crazy as like world domination, even though that's such a classic villain motive. But like the best instances of villains when they work is when their motivations are really quite understandable, or even like Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man 2. He wants to correct his mistake, and he wants to
build the sun.
well, yeah, he wants to, do what he was doing, which is use his brain to better mankind. He just is losing sight of the bigger picture. And then also, like Sandman on a small scale, he's trying to support his daughter and that sort of thing. And it's like, well, those are really the best villain motives, and family is a good motivator there. But, it just I think that's really it, because it helped put everything into focus.
Okay. I think that my favorite scene would definitely be probably the moment that he chooses to take that leap of faith and go into the character that he became, as well as the seeing the humanity behind the villains. To me, often at times, even in the DC and the Marvel universes, you don't get to see the humanity. And I think that's what I liked about Thanos. You actually did get to see the humanity behind the character of Thanos. And I think that's why it worked for the Avengers universe. So
it's rare that I'll say that a character from the MCU, I actually consider that character a much better character than their version in the comics.
What about the Vulture in Homecoming? Like, he was amazing.
Yeah, well, and that version of Mysterio was really well done too, because they gave him
that Vulture did have a very grounded, very human motivation. He was pissed off that the rich people could come in and do whatever they wanted.
Well, that's very appropriate for Spider-Man as a character, because Spider-Man,
and eventually he becomes that and doesn't see it.
Yeah, well, but also Spider-Man as a character, even from day one, he was kind of the anti-Fantastic Four, in the sense that the Fantastic Four, their identities were publicly known. They were very wealthy. They were very much part of the superhero establishment and the kind of the scientific, almost military industrial complex in a way. Um, so they were very much in the in crowd, and they always fought like the intergalactic, interdimensional threats. They never ever bothered with normal street crime, whereas Spider-Man and Daredevil and others, they were always street level heroes. And now, granted, they would fight, villains with larger motives, but at the end of the day, that's what they did. They patrolled the streets and kept their focus largely on the streets. And so therefore when you have a villain like the Vulture, who his motive is that it's against the in that universe, it's against the Avengers and the Tony Starks and the establishment figures, because they don't care about ordinary people. And it's like, well, that makes total sense. And it's why Spider-Man has to ultimately keep his focus on being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Let's take a look at
Actually, yeah.
Well, I did want to throw out one more as far as the motivations and whatever. One scene we haven't specifically touched on that is one of my favorites, I'll have to mention, is Aaron's death sequence. Basically, the whole part where he's fighting Spider-Man, Miles, and Miles unmasks him. He already knows who the Prowler is, and he unmasks himself. And then you have that moment of, oh, no, and then like he just kind of breaks down, and you get Kingpin impatiently in the car, like, what are you doing? Take him out. And then he puts the mask back down. For a minute, you think that's some cold-blooded shit. He's getting ready to put the mask back on. But then he just stands there and lets the Kingpin gun him down. And it's like, that was just a great scene. It was really, definitely the pathos, definitely that's going to scar this kid for life sort of thing.
But that's that moment, really, as they say, the great with great power comes great responsibility. Right. That motive where he has to think to himself, if he was just strong enough, if he had been strong enough of will, he could have done something.
Right. But it also does show that Aaron still had humanity, and that he was not just this villain for hire. He was basically a good guy, just had a bad choice of occupation.
It was just a job. That was all it was. Yeah. I mean, Spider-Man's always been I always look at him as the anti-Batman. I mean, he's not rich. He's not very fortunate in most of his life. Though he did have his parents, well, not parents, his aunt and uncle growing up. And but he's also an inclusive character, whereas Batman is an exclusive character. Batman shoves away, whereas Spider-Man tends to draw in, and his villains actually reflect that. The only villain of Spider-Man's that really reflects like a Batman villain is Venom.
Kinda, yeah. Well, the only
I like Green Goblin.
Well, I like what you said there with him being a inclusive character. The only thing I'd throw in there is that I think the big difference is that, and this is again part of the pathos, part of what makes the character. Spider-Man, I think in his heart of hearts, he really wants to be inclusive and be included as well, and he wants that connection, but for most of his existence he is rejected, and he is mistrusted and mislabeled and painted as a public menace and all these things. And like, there was a line from the X-Men crossover episode of Spider-Man the Animated Series, and I think he summed it up so well. It's like, I can save the world 10 times over, but when I need help, I'm on my own. And it's like, so it's more so that other people are shoving him out, and rather than like Batman, like you said, he tends to shove others out. And I do think Spider-Man as a character has always been a more deliberately down-to-earth, relatable person, because both Batman and Superman, if you're talking about DC, both of them are extraordinary people in different respects. One's an alien, and then the other one is the extremely traumatized son of billionaires. So it's like, maybe you can relate to the trauma thing, maybe you can relate to feeling like an alien, but even then it's like they're very kind of aspirational, almost godlike beings, whereas Spider-Man is very, very much a grounded character.
Mhm.
So what do you think about
financially,
the
even
music behind the film?
What's that?
Oh,
What do we think about the
music.
music behind the film?
We
What was
already
that?
went through the music. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Well, the
Yeah.
music was done by Daniel Pemberton.
Right.
He was involved with King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, Ocean's 8, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Steve Jobs, The Awakening, and The Haunted Airman. So
And Birds of
it's
Prey.
interesting
Yes.
credibility to him behind him. So
Yeah.
just wanted to mention that. Oh, and he's the musician behind the Dark Crystal series that's on Netflix. So, and
The lead.
Birds of Prey.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
Birds of Prey had a great soundtrack too. Actually,
did.
that makes sense. I felt some similarities when I was watching that.
And of course,
Yeah.
this one again, it had a lot of original. The main theme, of course, was "Sunflower" by Post Malone, but you also got that "What's Up, Danger" and "Familia" were both pretty fun. Yeah, you got some good stuff, and just the music cues that they used. It was the way they strung it together. Again, it was expertly put together. You can say that, I think.
Well, I mean, and like that, the award that you're talking about, that use of music.
Oh, hell yeah. This is
award,
one
this
of the
would be
reasons
a contender.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway.
Was there anything else from this particular film that we wanted to touch bases on?
I think we've been totally lost in the Spider-Verse for a while now.
I think that
And
may
never
be true.
coming out.
Then let us do our credos.
Yeah,
So,
let's not get into Spider-Mite.
Okay.
No.
Uh,
Hey.
why don't we start with you, Dustin? Give us.
I'm a horror collector here in Milwaukee. I collect anything related to horror movies. I show off my collection on my channel, The Crypt of Horrors, and also my Instagram, The Crypt of Horrors. And at some point, I am launching my own horror podcast, which I've been saying that for a year and a half now, but I mean it this year, god damn it. And I think I actually have a name and stuff picked out finally, too. So,
Well, 2020 is a good year for horror.
ugh, don't get me started.
No shortage of horrors on all fronts.
The Circus of Value, but the Crypt of
So,
Horrors. Oh, and you can follow
why don't
me
you
on,
tell us a little bit about
you can follow me
Oh, go
on
ahead.
you can follow me on Twitter at Der Cryptaxis, DER Cryptaxis.
Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am Dane Kyle, aka Dane Demrung on YouTube, and I'm on a channel called Indie Horror Film Creative. I just posted up the first in a while of my unboxing series, where I unboxed several movies that have not officially been released to Blu-ray that should be or haven't been or whatever. I deliberately chose some very controversial ones like Song of the South and Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, things that might get taken off the shelves or mysteriously go out of print for one reason or another, but I do so as part of film history.
Do you actually have those?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have those on Blu-ray now. And I'm very pleased. It's just a good way to not only preserve film history, but also just to talk through the controversial aspects instead of running away from them. But also, I am trying to not only do more unboxings, but I'm also trying to transition into some more just talking about different film topics and things. And I was going to build a dedicated editing PC, but I'm thinking I should just use what I have. And then if I need to build one, then I'll know what I need, as opposed to just saying I'm just going to build one just because. So hopefully that will result in some more edited content in the future besides just me doing it vlog style. But there's that. Plus, I'm trying to get back into filmmaking as much as I can during this particular time.
Okay.
During Hell World.
Yeah.
Going over to Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm Septum Sen of Septum Sen versus the World. We're all about that physical media here on our page. We do new releases, and we do pickup videos as our mainstay. But of course, we do occasional reviews and what do they call it? Of course, the vlogcast. Of course, that is every Monday. So if you all join us in times between 8 and 9 o'clock Eastern Time, we talk about various topics in the entertainment world, and we welcome your interaction as well, because it's always good we always read the comments as they are posted during the live chat. Of course, these last 2 weeks are going to be are going to be the Criterion Collection. We we did our first week, which was pretty good conversation. We'll be finishing that conversation next week, which will be taking place during the Criterion sale. And of course, I do help out with Inside Movies Galore, where we talk about these movies, and I help organize things. I'm hoping to have the subject for August done by next week, which will be great, so we can be prepared to offer you all of those cool movies that we're going to be covering on that month as well. But we're just getting started with Superhero Month, and we have an exciting week lined up next week with the original Christopher Reeve Superman as our pre-show, and the Power Rangers movie, the original one, not Turbo, if I recall.
Yeah, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, and we were saying with Superman that we were going to try to do the extended version.
So a lot of cool stuff upwards.
The Black Plague,
weeks.
the Spanish Inquisition, the Brady Bunch
reunion.
Who has a copy of the extended version?
I'd have to
no
check.
Clue. Yeah,
mine is supposedly it's in the mail from England, but I have no clue when it'll actually show up.
England.
Yeah, well, because the Superman collection, the big 5 movie one, the multiple discs one, that was actually cheapest from the UK Amazon store. It was region free, but because it's from England, it takes forever to get here.
Oh yeah, we got sort of a blockade going due to the thing.
Oh yeah.
But it's gonna be fun, I think, and we're gonna have some entertaining times.
Yep.
So definitely stay tuned to us next week for that.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Summer of Death is in full swing.
Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I am Kotobuki Jake. I am also a big-time movie collector, fan, viewer, what have you, when I have time to, as well as anime, television, and all sorts of media. As you can tell from the discussion tonight, comics being included among those. I also am co-host on Septum Sin versus the World, and I do have my own. I keep saying I do have my own nature-themed channel, Kotobuki Jake, on YouTube. It will be relaunched when I have time to put some videos together. It's just time is at a premium. But
it will be relaunched. Oh yes, it will.
Oh yes, it will be. It will be.
Alrighty, and my name is David Streggy. I am a founding father of Inside Movies Galore. We've had an awesome journey over the last 3 years, trying to tap into some interesting territory. So bear with us, and I hope you enjoy our discussions as we have them. So definitely enjoy doing that on Inside Movies Galore. I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur. So definitely go over and check some of the stuff out on there. Now, I haven't had any newer reviews, but I did put a new pickup video up of some of the stuff that I've collected over the last month or so. So definitely go over and check that out when you get a chance. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Have a great day, evening, and morning. And now back to the Spider-Verse.
It will never end.
Good night and good news.